Stop the genocidal persecution, mass incarceration, police brutality, and murder of Black and brown people. Stop the patriarchal degradation, dehumanization, and subjugation of all women everywhere, and all oppression based on gender or sexual orientation. Stop wars of empire, armies of occupation, and crimes against humanity. Stop the demonization, criminalization, and deportations of immigrants and the militarization of the border. Stop capitalism and imperialism from destroying our planet.
Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show on July 30th, 2020. My name is Andy Z. I'm one of the hosts of the Revolution Nothing Less show. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles. This is a show about an actual revolution, preparing for that revolution today. And what we just showed you at the opening of our show in the 5 stops is really the basis for this revolution. It's the fact that these are 5 horrific forms of oppression that this system can't reform away. And because so many of you who are watching the show, new viewers and older viewers, care about one or all of those 5 stops, that provides for the people the basis for making revolution, because millions of people feel that way. And the fact is, they can't be reformed. And even more so, if you think about all those different kinds of people who care about the oppression of immigrants, who care about the oppression of Black and brown people, you've seen this out in the streets over the last 61 days, who care about the environment, the wars and occupations, who care about all of this, the oppression of women, which is something we're going to be getting into, and the liberation of women in this show today. Because of this, this also indicates the forces of revolution, who could be a part of this revolution if they knew about it. But then these 5 stops pose very sharply 2 choices. Bob Avakian said, we have 2 choices: either live with all of this, these 5 stops, and condemn future generations to the same or worse if they even have a future, or make revolution. And making revolution is what this show is about. The scientific understanding of why we face what we face in the world today, how we could make an actual revolution, and what it would be for, has been developed by Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader who came out of the 1960s and is a really different kind of leader, extraordinary leader, who has developed this scientific approach to the world and to how we could actually transform the world and where humanity could really flourish and realize its potential to be free of all these different constraints that come down on the people. So that's 5 things and 2 choices. But for us, we put this in a very simple way, a very easy way to remember. The basis of this revolution and of this show is we call the 5-2-6. 5 stops, 2 choices, and 6 points of attention. The 6 points of attention are principles that the revolution clubs, the basic organization that you can get involved in to be a part of and to support this revolution. But these 6 principles are things that we live by, we spread them everywhere, we propagate them, and we're fighting for a world where these things really could be. So you can find the 5-2-6 on the website revcom.us, and you will hear a lot about it on this show. In fact, in today's show, one of our key segments is going to be a discussion with my co-host, Sunsara Taylor, and with Luan from the Revolution Club here in LA and the tour Get Organized for an Actual Revolution, dealing with one of these 5 stops and one of the points of attention, which is the oppression of women and the liberation of women. And before we get to that, we're going to show you today the situation that's been developing in Portland, Oregon, and the fascist moves that are underlying that and what needs to be done about that. And then I'm going to make a substantive commentary on that video that you're going to see. We'll go to the segment then on women's oppression and liberation, and then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about another operation of the Trump-Pence regime that is taking place in Chicago, Operation Legend. And so that's our show. Sit tight. It's going to run about an hour or so, but it'll be the best hour you spend all day. So let me go right to this video.
Since late March, after the murder of George Floyd inspired protests nationwide, people in Portland have been taking to the streets. For more than 60 days, the city has been home to one part of the beautiful rising against institutionalized racism and the murder of black people by the police. During this uprising, masses of people have been pushing beyond the limits of protest as usual, tearing down hated monuments to white supremacy, like those statues built of Confederate generals and slave owners. Local authorities and state and city governments run by Democrats have been viciously repressing protests. While they have sent the police in riot gear to shoot rubber bullets, arrest hundreds of nonviolent protesters, and tear-gassed crowds of people, for the open white supremacist fascist Donald Trump, this has not gone far enough.
And the winners dominate. If you don't dominate your city and your state, they're going to walk away with you.
On June 26, Trump signed an executive order that was nothing short of both a fascist tirade against the uprising and a concrete plan to violently suppress it. The order allows protesters to be thrown in jail for 10 years if they are at any demonstration where alleged violence occurs. This order also laid the legal basis for the creation of Operation Diligent Valor, in which federal troops under Trump's direct authority would sweep into Democratic cities to replace the roles of local authorities. On July 2nd, federal troops authorized and deployed by Trump himself invaded the city of Portland to put down the protests. A direct attack on the uprising of millions of people against police brutality and systemic racism. These agents, dressed in camouflage with no identifying insignia, have shot and tear-gassed protesters and carried out military-style operations where feds in unmarked vans snatch people off the streets, often for no reason.
How are we supposed to know who you are? How are we supposed to know you're not kidnapping us and you're civilians kidnapping us?
Dousing unarmed protesters in tear gas and shooting them with rubber bullets, fracturing one man's skull. What's more, this is being done in spite of the fact that Portland's mayor and city council and Oregon's governor and attorney general didn't ask for these forces and are demanding they leave, joined by many other mayors.
They're not wanted here. We haven't asked them here. In fact, we want them to leave.
In fact, Portland's mayor was himself tear-gassed while attending a protest. These deployments are not just an attack on the masses of people rising up, but also on Trump's ruling class rivals, the liberals and Democrats who run the governments of many states and cities, including Portland.
So what are you planning to do?
Well, I'm going to do something that I can tell you, because we're not going to let New York and Chicago and Philadelphia and Detroit and Baltimore and all of these, Oakland is a mess. We're not going to let this happen in our country. All run by liberal Democrats.
Is there more federal law enforcement to some of these cities?
More federal law enforcement, that I can tell you. In Portland, they've done a fantastic job. They've been there 3 days, and they really have done a fantastic job in a very short period of time. No problem. They grab them, a lot of people in jail. They're leaders. These are anarchists. These are not protesters. People say protesters. These people are anarchists. These are people that hate our country. And we're not going to let it go forward. And I'll tell you what, the governor and the mayor and the senators out there, they're afraid of these people. That's the reason they don't want us to help them. They're afraid. I really believe they're actually maybe even physically afraid of these people. How about Chicago? Would you say they need help after this weekend? Do you know the numbers? Did you hear the numbers? Many, many shot, many, many killed. This is worse than Afghanistan, by far. This is worse than anything anyone's ever seen. All run by the same liberal Democrats. And you know what? If Biden got in, that would be true for the country. The whole country would go to hell. And we're not going to let it go to hell. Thank you very much, everybody.
The reach of the federal government into local law enforcement, against the wishes of local elected officials, is part of crushing any and all opposition to Trump and his fascist agenda, even within the government itself. As federal police tried to make an example out of Portland, the protests grew rapidly to 4,000 people on July 24th. Instead of backing down or going home, this escalation spurred large numbers of people from a variety of ages and very different backgrounds into action, with groups of mothers, fathers, and veterans forming physical barriers with their bodies and courageously standing up against the feds. Protesters showed up prepared, with more protective gear to defend against the violent attacks by the feds and cops, helmets, gas masks, and homemade shields.
I shouldn't have to tell my kid not to wear a hoodie. I shouldn't have to tell my kid be careful of reaching in your pockets when you're walking down the street. My kid should be okay with walking. My kid should love her skin.
Black Lives Matter, that's why we're here. We're not here because of some building. We don't care about the building. We don't care about your stupid fence. It's not about me. It's about Black Lives Matter. There's so many amazing black women who have been doing this fight for years, and I showed up late. I'm so tardy to this party, but I'm making up for it because I'm so angry.
Seeing the wall of moms was so amazing. And, you can't mess with moms. Well, I've been so inspired by watching, but I felt like I was too old to come here safely. And so I've been sending money to for the resources. But the minute we walked in, we saw a wall of grandmas.
So that's why this Vietnam veteran, combat medic, who took injured and dead soldiers off of helicopters, this is why I did this. Back up. Well, I took an oath to defend my country. And then when I got to Vietnam, we committed atrocities. We committed atrocities every single day when I was in Vietnam. I took an oath to defend this government. And when I got to Vietnam, we committed atrocities. I stood next to a ditch in Vietnam, and we murdered 170 Vietnamese people.
On Saturday, July 25th, there were nationwide solidarity marches, which brought out thousands of people in Los Angeles, New York City, Seattle, Oakland, and other cities. In some cities, these protests were initiated by Refuse Fascism, which brought forward the need to not only strengthen the struggle against the federal crackdown and to strengthen the uprising against white supremacy, but to drive out the Trump-Pence fascist regime through sustained mass protest and stop the consolidation of a fascist America. The Revolution Club was also in the mix in several cities, boldly putting forward revolution, nothing less. The situation is developing rapidly, and we will continue coverage on revcom.us and the RNL show in the coming days.
What did you see? What did you think of what you just saw in Portland, Oregon? When you saw the paramilitary forces dressed in full camouflage, gas masks, weapons drawn, firing projectiles, stun grenades, tear gas, firing point blank at hundreds and thousands of protesters who were standing up against police brutality and the murder of black people. Did it look like a movie? Unreal and having little to do with you? Did you file it under business as usual for a news story about the U.S. military in Afghanistan or Yemen, and then go about your business? If your eyes were open and you have a conscience, you were outraged, and maybe you cursed Trump. But did you think these protesters are out of line and ruining things for good protesters, or hurting Democrats for the elections? Or perhaps better, did you cheer and take heart from the night after night coverage of the protesters and the waves of people coming out of the big middle class, the housewives, the dads, the vets, and even the Grantifa? But did you cheer, donate, and then move on? I'll be blunt. Are your eyes wide shut? Do you see what's behind those images, what they mean, and what do they tell us about where things are right now in this country and where things are headed fast. In early June, Bob Avakian wrote an article titled, "Radical Change is Coming. Will it be emancipating or enslaving? Revolutionary or reactionary?" Since written those words, that prediction, which is based on a scientific analysis of the situation we face and what is driving it, have become more and more real. There continues to be the beautiful and heroic struggle of the people against the oppression, brutality, and police murder of black people and people of color, and against the legacy of white supremacy more generally. A rising of millions so long overdue and welcome, and opening minds up and eyes every single day. Yet on the other side, there is not just an escalation of vicious violence against the people, but a change in the governing norms of this country, with potentially dire and even catastrophic consequences for any and every fight for a better world. The subject of today's RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show commentary, which is too little really understood, is that over the last month, the foul and gaseous utterances from the mouth of Trump, his ominous executive orders for a full-out police state, and now the fascist paramilitary forces that he has put on the ground in Portland and Seattle with an announced threat to deploy as many as 50,000 more such armed forces to cities around the country, directly targeting the youth in the inner cities. All of this has definite objective. What people don't know or refuse to see has been a qualitative advance towards a fascist America, where the law is whatever Trump and his regime say it is, backed up with brute force, accountable only to his regime. This is a qualitative leap towards a fascist America, and it is well on its way if we don't stop it. This is not a mere election year ploy. It is not political theater to feed his rabid base. It is not a diversion from our beautiful struggle. It is an operation to crush that struggle and every struggle for justice and to wipe out its opposition from the Democrats. It is not quasi, neo, proto, or sort of fascism. It is fascism, and it is happening here. There's blood on the streets, the people's blood, and everyone better see and feel that. There's a terror of unidentified paramilitary forces snatching people off the street without cause, and recognize that this is not rogue. It is ordered and backed by Trump, his Attorney General William Barr, the head of Homeland Security Chad Wolf, and backed by a fascist Republican Party. This is real and it has direction. Take it in. It's evidence and it leads to a conclusion you don't want to, but need to recognize and act on. I'll say it again. Non-lethal bullets to the heads of protesters in Portland, while fascist vigilantes amped up by Trump kill Black Lives Matter protesters with cars and then this week shooting them with guns. This is the slippery slope gathering momentum of what's to come on a whole other level, if we don't stop it. Let no one say in this country, as people tried to do in Nazi Germany, that we didn't see it and we didn't know. Over the last 10 days, the Trump-Pence fascist regime has launched 2 different federal quasi-military operations. A letter from a reader published on revcom.us titled 2 Operations, One Fascist Offensive, states, "These 2 operations, Operation Diligent Valor and Operation Legend, are different in many ways, but each is an outrageous assault on the masses of people and on constitutional rules and norms in the U.S. And if the regime is allowed to get away with this, taken together they mark a major leap in consolidating fully fascist rule, the exercise of blatant dictatorship of the bourgeois, which means the capitalist class ruling through reliance on open terror and violence." I will come to Operation Legend later in this show. This operation involves sending federal forces into the inner cities to be directed against the youth, ostensibly to stop them from killing each other, but the reality will be quite the opposite. Trump is packaging both of these operations as part of his election campaign as the law and order candidate. Operation Diligent Valor directed now against protests in Portland and Seattle, is aimed straight at the right to dissent, the right to speech, the right to protest. We saw just the tip of the iceberg of what these thugs are doing in the film clips. In successive executive orders since June 26, Trump has further advanced the doctrine of whatever he says is the law, and that as president, he can do whatever he wants and enforce it as he wants. Make no mistake, deploying federal paramilitary forces is not piggery as usual, or Trump staging an out-of-proportion response to acts of graffiti and trash can fires to play to his Fox and Breitbart base as an election year ploy. No. This is a lining up of tens of millions of people behind an ideological and political program, a program of white supremacist fascist society where everything and everyone who does not conform to that program is an enemy. His executive order of June 26 said that the protests of the last 60 days against racism and police brutality were carried out by, quote, rioters, arsonists, and left-wing extremists, some of whom have explicitly identified themselves with ideologies such as Marxism that call for the destruction of the United States system of government, end quote. And these radicals, it went on to say, quote, advance a fringe ideology that paints the United States of America as fundamentally unjust and shamelessly attack the legitimacy of our institutions and the very rule of law itself. Did you hear that? How the belief that America is fundamentally unjust is now being criminalized. Unidentified camouflage-wearing militia jumping out of vans to snatch people off the street without stating cause or crime, that's police state shit. Not a made-for-TV movie, but real, setting precedent with the possibility of becoming the norm. And hasn't it been the case for years now that today's outrage becomes tomorrow's norm? Think concentration camps on the border. I have used the term paramilitary. That refers to armed forces who function like military, but are made up of other kinds of irregular forces, not subject to the same rules and constraints as the military. Rules that are, yes, broken consistently by the U.S. military in their wars of occupation. But the paramilitary here is officially accountable only to Trump via his henchmen in the Department of Homeland Security. And not so, by the way, the core of this heavily armed force is made up of federal agents of the Homeland Security Department with a strong presence of the Border Patrol Tactical Team, which is known as BORTAC. This is a special operations unit that is based on the U.S.-Mexico border and has been deployed overseas, including to Iraq and Afghanistan. These are forces that have demonstrated particular loyalty to Trump and his fascist program. And as is well known, and there is public record of this, these forces, as with the local police, are riddled with fascists who when off-duty are part of fascist thug forces and who do the same when they're in their uniforms. This is the making of a fascist state. And there is a rough analogy here to how Hitler developed the Gestapo in Nazi Germany out of the thug forces who were loyal to him. The transition of what was called the SA to the SS. This is the story of how the former Nazi Party thugs, the SA brown shirts, intimidated people as part of Hitler's rise to power. Then, as Nazi rule over Germany was consolidated, Hitler got rid of the SA and the SS became the official enforcers. Now, what is happening here today with Trump is a much messier intermingling of these forces and phases, more akin to what is happening in the Philippines today under their Trump, Roberto Duterte. There is another foreboding element to this particular fascist offensive. The Trump-Pence fascist regime is preparing the ground and raising the specter of not leaving office if they don't win the election or if it is contested. They have already announced a campaign to recruit 50,000 of exactly the kind of people who are in these paramilitary units or who support them to become poll watchers, whose job will be what? To intimidate, to harass, and prevent masses of Black and Latino people from voting. With the precedent and terms that have been created with Operation Diligent Valor, it's not a stretch to envision these paramilitary troops being deployed to suppress any protest against moves by the Trump-Pence regime to stay in power. As prelude and preparation for this, Trump is sending these forces into Democratic cities now, demonizing the Democratic mayors, as well as Biden, as weak and tools of the radical left who will take away your police and your freedom. When the mayor of Portland was tear-gassed when he went to talk to the protesters, Trump called him weak and celebrated. Look, language matters. It signifies. The language of Operation Diligent Valor, a misnomer if ever there was one, is the language of patriarchy, white supremacy, and fascism. There are two prongs, two campaigns as Trump launches his full-out offensive, his law and order campaign for re-election, which more fundamentally and in its essence is actually bringing a fascist order to rule. Operation Legend, directed against the basic youth and against crime, is the second prong, and I will be getting into that later in this program. Radical change is coming. There is no going back to the way things were. The dark forces of fascism are out of the basement, and more fundamentally, no one should want to go back to a way of life that, on top of every other oppressive thing that this system does to people around the world, has its police routinely murder black youth without consequence. A system that can produce a Donald Trump, bring him and his fascist regime to power, and which has brought us to this point that I've been discussing, has surely passed its expiration point. And as I will get to in part 2 of today's commentary, now is the time for millions of people to act together to drive the Trump-Pence regime from power. Before we get to part 2 of today's commentary, we want to take some time to go to a special segment that's going to dig into a key question for the revolution. That's one of the 5 stops we read at the opening of this program on the oppression and the liberation of women.
Stop the patriarchal degradation, dehumanization, and subjugation of all women everywhere, and all oppression based on gender and sexual orientation. Putting an end to this oppression is a cornerstone of the revolution that we're making, and we're going to dig into this today. We're going to talk about the oppression of women and the fight to liberate women, and what this has to do with the emancipation of all humanity. This is going to be an opening, and we're going to return to this in future segments. So there's a few things we're going to share with you. But we're going to start with an excerpt from Bob Avakian's 2003 speech called Revolution, Why It's Necessary, Why It's Possible, and What It's All About. And this section is called A World of Rape and Sexual Assault.
And what about the situation of women in this greatest of all countries? Having to live in a man's world, that is, a world of male supremacy, a world of rape and sexual assault. Think of this fact. Between 1/4 and 1/3 of all women in the U.S. will be raped or sexually assaulted in their lifetimes. A woman is raped almost every minute in this country. Now, this makes me think of something that the great African-American novelist and writer Richard Wright put into the beginning of one of his books, Big Boy Leaves Home. It's a story also that begins in the rural South. It's a story of some young black boys who go out have a little fun on one day. They go down for a walk by the river. They're having fun with each other the way kids do. They're laughing and playing. They're walking along the edge of the river, and all of a sudden they take a turn in the river, and there is a white woman bathing in the river. And suddenly they're struck with terror, because they know, through no fault of their own, and purely by the accident of making that curve in the river, their lives are now in danger. That they could be lynched just for coming upon this white woman in this way. And this same kind of situation exists for women throughout the society. You go shopping. Maybe you have to go at night because you work during the day. You come out of the store. If the lights aren't working in the parking lot, or if you're parked in the wrong place, you have a real fear of being attacked and raped. If you're walking down the street and there's a place there that's a little bit hidden where somebody could be hiding, you have a real fear of being attacked and raped. If you go the wrong place at the wrong time, or if you do something that some asshole says means you asked for it, you could be attacked and raped. Now, Elaine Boozler is a comedian. She got at this point in a way of using humor to illustrate a very serious and deadly thing. She told about how, in one of her routines, she told about how she came out of a movie with a male friend of hers, a good friend, and he said, "Oh, it's a beautiful night. Why don't we go for a walk down by the river?" And she said, "Well, maybe it's safe for you, but I don't think I'm going for a walk down by any river. It's late at night, it's dark, and I'm carrying a vagina." Now, this is a way to use humor to make a deadly serious point. And another cold statistic captures a real horror lived by women every day. A woman is battered in the U.S. every 15 seconds. And by far, this is done most often by their boyfriends or husbands, who have been trained and conditioned to view these women not as equal partners, but as something like their property, their possession, and a breeder of their children. For most of the time the United States has existed, and even within the lifetimes of many people still alive today, there were laws in many states in the U.S. which, in terms of the rights of persons, did not include women in the category of persons with these rights. And these laws and the customs that went along with them openly treated women as inferior and subordinate to their husbands and to men in general. As I pointed out in the book, Preaching from a Pulpit of Bones, up until less than 20 years ago, there were still states in the U.S. where there was no such thing as marital rape, where a husband could illegally force his wife to have sex with him whether she wanted to or not. And for most of the history of this country, this was a situation for wives in general. And then there is the move, backed and encouraged from the highest offices of the land, to keep cutting back and ultimately to take away from women the right to have an abortion. Upholding and fighting for the right of abortion is a crucial part of fighting for the emancipation of women in the fullest sense. It is a crucial part of freeing women from every form of domination and oppression by men, breaking the chains on half the human race, enabling women to take part fully and equally in every sphere of society, and in the struggle to radically change all of society. Denying women the right to abortion, denying them the right to decide when or if they will have children, with everything that means and all the effects that will have on their lives. Denying this is like battering and rape. Denying the right to abortion is a means of exercising forcible control by a male supremacist society over the very lives of women and over their bodies.
That was Bob Avakian from his 2003 talk, Revolution, Why It's Necessary, Why It's Possible, and What It's All About. And this past week, we went out on the street and got people's thinking on this question. I want to share that with you, some footage from that, and then at the tail end, I'll come back in the studio with Luan, and we'll talk some about both of these pieces. All right, I'm out here on the street with the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show on Hollywood in front of the nice, beautiful Black Lives Fists. I'm here with Luan, and we're going to be talking to people about this sign and both sides of it. It says women are not bitches, hoes, incubators, punching bags, sex objects, or breeders. Women are full human beings. The other side, we're going to flip it over, we're also going to talk to people about, is one of the 6 points of attention of the revolution. This is point number 2, and it says, we fight for a world where all the chains are broken, Women, men, and differently gendered people are equals and comrades. We do not tolerate physically or verbally abusing women or treating them as sexual objects, nor do we tolerate insults or jokes about people's gender or sexual orientation. And so we're going to hit the streets right now and get some reactions to this.
Women are not bitches, hoes, incubators, punching bags, sex objects, or breeders. Women are full human beings.
Sometimes you just walk in the street and people call you names and devalue who you are.
We live in the 21st century, but I feel like I'm being preyed on every day.
Yeah, you don't feel safe in the streets because you're just a woman. Not only in the streets, but everywhere you go.
I think us women, since we're little, we're taught like, oh, you can wear this, or you have to act like that, or you have to do that, because or else in the streets you can out of nowhere get raped or sexually abused, or I don't know.
Anything.
Yeah, so I think we need to change that because women are not an object. We're human beings, as it said there. So that really needs to change because I want to feel safe. I don't want to walk in the street and be scared of something happening to me just because I'm a woman.
I have been beaten, battered, punched, shot at by my children's father. And I felt worthless. I felt hopeless.
I mean, I've seen cousins, friends, sisters, and, get beat on, called names. And
it's very unfortunate that domestic violence is an actual thing that's still going on in today's age, because that's disgusting. Personally, I don't believe in it. I've seen it growing up, and it's horrible.
I mean, I've been sexualized since I was a very young girl because I came into my own at a very young age. I also bartended for many, many years, and there's a lot of giggling with rude or obscene comments that you kind of just have to brush off your back if you don't want to get screamed at or not get money. So
I used to be in the military, and staff sergeants were mostly men. When you're in a situation where male bravado comes out in full force like that and women are involved, then you absolutely get sexism and sexual harassment. They feel like it's a form of becoming part of the gang, so to speak. So especially in the military is full of bullies, and I experienced some of that firsthand.
Out in the city of Richmond, they have something called the Blade, while girls are being pretty much defaced, sold as objects right there. So I've seen girls get beat up out there. I've seen girls, a lot of things, man. Like, shit, I don't even want to go in detail. Fuck that side of my life, There's a lot of things going on in this world that are unfair, but thankfully there's females like you who are trying to stand up for everyone's rights. Appreciate that.
I think women are human beings. I mean, all this is extremely offensive. I think we should fight this. I think it's completely wrong. And anybody who believes in this is clearly a chauvinist, or they probably support the patriarchy, which I wouldn't know why you would.
They acting out because they've been learned to act this way. It's been taught to abuse your loved one. It's been taught to degrade a woman. It's been taught. Like racism has been taught.
I think we have an obligation to change things right now and make a better world from the generations that are here. I don't want my daughters, or even the girls that are already alive, I don't want any other little child to have to go through everything that we've been through. They deserve better. We deserve better.
Can you give any examples either from your own life or other people's lives or from the broader society, what it is that you're talking about you don't want them to have to go through?
I don't want them to be scared of walking through life thinking that they are going to be raped or catcalled or sexually assaulted, or I don't want them to think that that's okay. I don't want them to think that love is equal to like violence or anything that they've been through. They deserve better, and they need to treat better. They need to learn, and men need to get more educated so they don't have to go through this.
We fight for a world where all the chains are broken. Women, men, and differently gendered people are equals and comrades. We do not tolerate physically or verbally abusing women or treating them as sexual objects, nor do we tolerate insults or jokes about people's gender or sexual orientation.
Some real shit right there. That's all I gotta say. Keep it real. That's really real, man. That's about it.
You pretty much just outlined my own personal, how I like to
personally hold myself accountable on a poster board. I feel like that's a beautiful way to put how we should all approach everyone and treat people and what we expect to be treated like in return. So I very much agree with that statement.
I think that's perfect. People should not think that we're objects, or especially the sexual orientation thing. That it's something that really bothers me, that people think that it's funny, like to joke about it, and I hate that. That is not funny, because people who go through that, it's super, like, for them, they don't think it's funny. For me, I'm not like straight, so it's not funny, and I think people should stop with that, and especially also the treat us like sexual objects, because we're not. Please stop.
I agree. I'm transgender.
100% a gay man. So yeah, I definitely agree with this. We have to stick together because we are the minority one way or another. So let the oppressed stop being oppressed. Let's join together and fill the world with love, more love.
I agree with every word. I can sign up under each word here. Yeah. What I stand for is that we're all from the world. I don't even care about countries or religions or color or accents, anything. We're all equal.
Through a revolution, this is what we're aiming for, where all the chains really are broken. And women and men and differently gendered people really do see each other all over the planet from the time they're born as equals and comrades, where a girl never learned what it's like to be afraid, where a boy never got trained to look at a girl or a woman in terms of just her body parts. What would that mean to you? What is that? Have you ever thought about that, imagined that, and now that you're thinking about it?
I think that would be ideal. I would think that, I think that if that happens, we won. All the revolution that we're doing and all the fight and everything that we're doing will be worthy. That's the main goal.
You think that's worth fighting for?
Yeah. For a world where everybody feels safe to be whoever they are. Not only being like, this is not life. This is not what it should be.
For me, it's actually kind of hard to imagine that, because it's something that we go through every day. People saying stuff to us on the street, but that would be ideal. Like, that's what I want. That's what I want, like, to feel safe. And people not look at me like an object, and that would be perfect. I would love that.
It would be a dream to live in a world like that, where you can feel safe no matter gender you are.
I just think this is really beautiful, and I think we're in an intense time with all this sex trafficking and all the things that are going on, and so many people have a blind eye to it, including our media. So good job bringing it out. It's a very, very important matter at the moment.
I love what you're doing. I love what you stand for. So when I hear something like this, I'm all for it. I want to support it.
I really would like to see more. So I'm going to subscribe to your channel for sure.
Okay, so that was a very interesting and very moving segment to go and film out on the street. Before we were on the street, just to remind you, we shared with you a segment from Bob Avakian's speech in 2003 where he spoke about a world of rape and sexual assault and the violent assault on women's right to abortion and birth control. And so I'm very happy to have in the studio with me Luan, who was out on the street with me, and I thought we should talk some about what we encountered, especially in light of where we began with the clip from BA, what stood out, what was revealed from what people do understand, what were some of the gaps in what people understand, and how all this relates to the revolution that we're fighting to make and that humanity needs. So you could start wherever you want to start.
Yeah, I just think people should let it sit with you that where every woman actually went to first was actually the violence, the violence that's felt, or not feeling safe in your own skin, like you're just walking down the street or just trying to be a person and you're being constantly objectified. And I thought that was, you feel it and you could see it very, starkly, like in how people were talking. And I just kind of thought that something that really kind of captured or concentrated some of what exactly like what we're talking about needs to be stopped was when this one woman was saying that she doesn't want any woman to actually think that love should be equated with violence. And you think about this is so normal that you literally have a situation where people tell each other, oh, it's just boys will be boys, or will say like, oh, he just likes you if he's saying this or that, or where women feel like it's their own fault if they're being battered or bruised. And there's so much, shame and guilt that's around this. And this is something that actually needs to be talked about, needs to actually be opened up, in a deep way. And you think about it, these were complete strangers. We did not know these people before. We brought this sign that said women are not, bitches, hoes, incubators, punching bags, or sex objects. Women are full human beings. And then had point of attention number 2, which speaks to what kind of world that we're fighting for, And this is what people's response was to it. And you think about it, like, this is, where this is, we didn't make up these responses. Like, this is the reality of what people are facing. And this is, you see it like very clearly and starkly. And I just kind of think that, going back to the clip that we showed, like with BA, where he was talking about the whole thing about like the little boys, like the black boys playing in the river, and then, they're having fun, they're doing their own thing, and then they come around that bend and they see that white woman, and suddenly you're struck with fear, for your life. Like, that is I thought that was a very stark and sharp concentration of the reality of what actually gets, come together, and it's what we saw on the street. It's what people see every day, but it's so normalized, and it's such a thing that people just think is their own fault or take on an individual level, when this is a problem with the whole system. It's a problem with the whole way that things are functioning. And, I think we should talk some about that. But then, there's this point that about like, well, okay, well, how do we actually stop that,
Yeah, I was just going to say with that, that violence that you talked about that just came out on the surface, you got to multiply that by billions around the world, because this is a worldwide phenomenon. I was happy that at the end the woman spoke about sexual trafficking, which is millions and millions of women and girls across this planet kidnapped, raped, beaten, sold by starving families into conditions. And then there are millions and millions of men who are trained to see women and girls as something to be used and abused in that way. And this is a worldwide problem. And it is rooted in the system. This is something that people need to understand. And I don't think there was tremendous. It was actually very inspiring and moving, and shows a lot of potential, how much there was a tremendous response to the POA number 2, to a world where women and men and differently gendered people are treated as equals and comrades. There was a lot of attraction to that. There's also a lot of people who said, we quoted one of them, we showed one of them in the film, but others said it, who have a hard time imagining it, because they're so used to this world. But that is actually possible. There is nothing about men in their human nature, or women in their human nature, or God ordained, or written in stone that men have to treat women in this kind of way. But it is ingrained in this system. Capitalism, imperialism, it is ingrained in all class-divided systems. This is why it can only be ended by overthrowing this system, but through an actual revolution. And this is an understanding we have to take to people, to actually realize that desire that was so beautifully expressed by so many people we spoke to. It also really stood out to me, and we could say more about that, but I wanted to bring out, I know we were struck by this on the street at the time, and we've been talking about it a lot since, but that sign, the first side of the sign said, women are not bitches. People talked about that, hoes, punching bags, sex objects. They talked about all of that. Nobody that we spoke to brought up women are not breeders, women are not incubators. And I just want to say right now, and BA spoke about this in the segment we played from 17 years ago. He said there's an assault on women's right to abortion, and it is akin to rape and battery. It's the control, forcible control over women's lives and their bodies by a patriarchal society. That is true. That was 17 years ago, and it is worse and more intense now, and people do not understand this. Women who are forced to have children against their will, and this is what's going on. There are Christian fascists in power right now, Mike Pence, and many like him who are part of this regime in power, who are trying to take away and advancing and taking away women's right to abortion and even birth control. There was just a Supreme Court ruling that gave religious bigots the right to deprive women of birth control coverage if they work for them. I mean, this is completely outrageous. But I just want to say, when you speak about violence, women who are forced to have children against their will, that is a form of violence against them. Women their lives are foreclosed. Having a child, if you want to have a child, is a beautiful thing. It can be a beautiful thing. But being forced to have a child as a woman in this world, you are driven into poverty or deeper into poverty. You're forced to drop out of school or foreclose your life plans. You are diminished. And your humanity is erased, and you are reduced to a breeder or an incubator. And it is very heavy, and it's a big problem that this is not something that was on the surface and recognized. Not only not recognized by the men, but not recognized by most of the women we spoke to. This is a dangerous situation that has to be transformed because there's a movement that is advancing to take these rights away. And really, you talked about it last episode, a Handmaid's Tale vision for women. Really a biblical nightmare, biblical literalist nightmare for women. So I think that's very important. I know that we'll return to it in future segments. I don't know if you could say more about that if you want, but also I think we should talk just a little bit more about the potential that was revealed and this the potential to bring forward the anger, the fury of women as a mighty force for revolution, and where this sits in the mission of this show and in the mission of this revolution.
Yeah, I think that I really was resonating a lot with what you're drawing out about, what was missing or what people did not actually speak to. And I think that this is even part of like why you have a situation where even people who, if you ask them, they'll say, oh, I'm pro-choice, I'm pro this, but at the end of the day, they'll say, oh, that's a last resort, and I think that there is a deep fight for people to actually be drawn into seeing like that this isn't something that's just gonna like go away on its own, and we actually, if we want to see a future where like what we were talking about in point of attention number 2, like where women, men, and differently gendered people are treated as equals and comrades, this actually has to be fought for. This being like a fight against, all the vicious, tradition, all against all the this is what a woman has to be in society based on religious doctrine. A fight has to be fought against all these ideas, against this, and to actually end this system, and it's a big part of that. And I think, this is something that you get in a really visceral sense, like in that clip that we showed in the beginning. And I think that, there's a lot that people have to begin to actually look into, as they're in the streets, as they're fighting against this whole system with people who are, stepping forward against the white supremacy that's been coming down, who are standing up for Black lives, all these things. This fight, for women to be actually treated and seen as full human beings has to be further and further infused in what people are talking about and what people are relating to, and even in like what kind of future do we see as possible. And this is something that can't be done without an actual fight for real revolution.
So look, like we said at the beginning, we're going to be getting into this question of breaking all the chains, ending the oppression and enslavement of women as a cornerstone and key driving force in the revolution that we're making. We're going to be continuing to get into this in future episodes. I just want to end this segment by making the point very strongly. It is possible to get to a world where women are treated as full human beings, where they never learn to be afraid in the ways that we heard from all these women on the street, and where men and boys are not trained to see women in that way. That will take a revolution, and that revolution is possible. That's what we're fighting for, and that's what we're calling you into. Also, I want to echo what Luan said as a challenge to everybody who's lifting their heads and joining the struggle against injustice in many different forms, that this is a fight, the fight to liberate women that everybody has to make their own. And so I want to end with a quote. Actually, we wanted to end with a quote from Bob Avakian from his book Basics, from the talks and writings of Bob Avakian. It's a handbook for revolution, and this is from his chapter on morality. And he puts this challenge. He says, in many ways, and particularly for men, the woman question, and whether you seek to completely abolish or to preserve the existing property and social relations and corresponding ideology that enslave women, or maybe just a little bit of them, is a touchstone question among the oppressed themselves. It is a dividing line between wanting in and really wanting out, between fighting to end all oppression and exploitation and the very division of society into classes, and seeking in the final analysis to get your part in this.
Earlier, I spoke about Operation Diligent Valor, Trump sending in federal paramilitary forces into Portland and other cities to crush protests and more. And now I want to talk about the other, even less understood, fascist escalation and offensive now underway, Operation Legend. This operation was named for a 4-year-old victim of gun violence in Kansas City. This has all the same elements as the offensive directed against the movements of resistance focused in Portland. Operation Legend is also further ripping up the rule of law while putting policing cities and black and brown youth under the direct threat from a white supremacist fascist regime and a paramilitary force loyal and accountable to them. And at the same time, because of the heart-rending cost, the bitter pain of our youth killing each other, and people's desire to see this end, the real deal with Operation Legend is confusing to many. Trump and his Attorney General, William Barr, are using the fact of the youth killing each other to say, this is the real problem, black-on-black crime. This, they say, and not the police terrorizing and killing black youth, is the bigger problem that justifies bringing in federal forces and charges to target these youth. Just as 3 years ago, Trump demonized all Latino immigrants as drug pushers and bad people to justify and neutralize outrage against the concentration camps on the border, camps which are still in effect. Here, he is demonizing black youth and blaming them for their own suffering to put a tighter vice grip and worse on these same youth and on the broader communities in which they live. Pushing this line of black-on-black crime, playing on the real anguish around us, these open white supremacists seek to both legitimate their fascist program and to bring a militarized, federalized force and new rules that can turn what has been the slow genocide of mass incarceration, police brutality, and outright murder by cops into what could become a fast genocide. Bob Avakian, in a piece on revcom.us titled Anything But the Truth, I quote, "For those, whether outright racists or people who have allowed themselves to take up the thinking of racists, who try to dismiss the outrage about police murder of black people by talking about how more black people are killed by other black people than by anyone else, including the police, as I have emphasized in a number of talks and writings, this too is caused by the system. It is the system working on people, confining masses of black people in conditions of deprivation, degradation, and hopelessness, and continually pumping at them the dog-eat-dog mentality that fuels this cutthroat system of exploitation and oppression from top to bottom." End quote from Bob Avakian. We have been and will continue to dig more deeply into the situation with the youth who are the target of this fascist program. The Revolution Club in Chicago is calling on people to work on changing this situation. So go to revcom.us to find out how you can be a part of and support what the Revcoms are doing in Chicago. Noche Diaz, a national leader of the Revolution Club, said this, quote, "We in the Revolution Club are grieving over lost loved ones and grieving with our friends and comrades who have lost family in the recent wave of shootings in Chicago. But we will not let hurt become despair, or let the pain and anger be turned into a weapon against the people. Our comrades in Chicago and in the clubs everywhere are fighting hard to win people. Yes, even and especially those who right now have their guns pointed at each other and have only revenge on their minds, to the emancipating outlook, methods, goals, and morality of this revolution based on the scientific understanding and strategy developed by Bob Avakian. This is something really worth living and fighting for, a revolution that can leave a much better world for all humanity, where all our children can grow up with the future they truly deserve." End quote. We will be covering the situation and the struggle in Chicago in depth in future episodes. What we have brought you today, the real deal with the two parts of this single fascist offensive. should be like a last warning siren before a tornado, a call to act now. There is no going back to normal. And given that normal is what got us here, normal is what put these youth in the situation they're in. Normal is the history and lived reality today of the legacy of slavery, the theft of Mexico, and the genocide against native peoples. Normal is this country that destroys our planet and brandishes its nuclear weapons at the world. We need a whole new system, and that can only come about through an actual revolution. In the film, Why We Need an Actual Revolution and How We Could Really Make Revolution, Bob Avakian says this, quote, "To a significant degree now, the conflict between the sections of society upholding this fascism and those opposing it, from various different perspectives, is shaping the terrain on which the struggle for revolution must be carried out. This conflict is likely to intensify and could erupt further into violent confrontation, and in any case, it would be a significant factor in the context of an all-out struggle between revolution and counter-revolution. What every movement for social justice, for environmental justice, for everything that justice demands must come together now to act together. Over the next several weeks, the millions of people who feel a deep hatred for Trump can and really must be transformed into a mass upsurge of sustained, nonviolent protests demanding Trump-Pence out now. This is a demand of the organization refusefascism.org. Go to their social media and their website, refusefascism.org. Go to the social media at the RevComs. Go to the website, revcom.us. The hour is late. The future of every single struggle depends on driving this fascist regime from power. We are not in a situation of either or, either my struggle or yours. We are in a fight for the future of humanity. If you are a first-time viewer, or you have been watching the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show for some time, and you are provoked to want to understand more deeply what has given rise to the oppression of women, of black people and of people of color, to the rise of fascism here and around the world, dig deeper. Get into what is the fundamental nature of the problem we face and what is the solution. Get into the root of this by getting into Bob Avakian and the work he has done. The scientific analysis of the sources and roots of this system, the scientific strategy of the way out of this madness, and a blueprint for a real socialist republic that is concentrated in the Constitution for a new socialist republic in North America that Bob Avakian authored. And get with the Revolution Club, who will be with you in fighting this fascism, doing so and representing for and preparing the people for the revolution that humanity truly needs. So that's it for this episode of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Please spread it on social media, let your friends know, talk about it, and write us. See you next time.